Sprays, and Exciting Days show, where we talk about sailboat racing in Kansas with tips and interviews and racing updates of the Kansas racing scene. We give you facts and win reports and the race committee report of the week. With the message for the Commodore every week, here's your host, John T.
Hey guys, what's going on? And this is John T, and we're going to talk about the Kansas sailing scene here in Kansas. And a lot of people don't think we have a lot going on here, but actually we're one of the biggest venues in the country and the third largest venue in the world. And people would think, well, how could you be landlocked and have so much happening? And so let's talk about that right out the gate. So let's just talk about the number of clubs that are in the Kansas City area, the metropolitan area. You're going to have a total of 7 clubs. Some people say, you got 7 clubs. And yeah, in a 60-mile radius, we have 7 clubs. So we got to Lee Summit and Lake Jacomo, and we've got 2 clubs out there, 2 public clubs out there, and 1 lake. And then you can go to Overland Park, Kansas, and you have, or Lenexa, Kansas, and you have Johnson County Sailing Society there. So there's 3 clubs right there. Then you can go up to Smithville, which is a short drive, 45 minutes going north, and there's a club there. And then you can roll up to Lawrence, Kansas, and there's Clinton Lake, and they have a club there as well. And then you could go to Marin, Kansas, and that is Perry Yacht Club. And then you can go to Topeka, Kansas, and that's Shawnee Yacht Club. There's 7 clubs in the Kansas City area, and a lot of people don't even realize that there's that many clubs in the area. So with all those clubs, you think, well, how do they come about? Where do they come from? And I really got to say that they've come because of the happening scene that's been here in the middle of the country. One of the fun facts about our sport here in the sailing world is the wind all blows the same way. So especially when you're on an inland lake type thing, the wind all blows the same way. It's a little bit more shifty, and we have a little bit more hills. So you have, and we lose a lot of our wind by July during the season. But for the most part, though, we can all live and die under the one design rule. And so that's one of the interesting fun facts that there is about the Kansas sailing scene, is that we have 7 public sailing clubs. So let's go into the next topic here and talk about the level of membership. Okay, these clubs, and once upon a time, were really large. I mean, super large. There's some of the clubs rosters, if you go back in the 70s, were way up around 500, 600, 700 members at one time. I mean, they were having to run multiple races because the lines on the racing scene were too crowded. In fact, Lake Shawnee kind of devised one of the better plans, and I feel like most of the clubs should have done that, and they kept their membership way up there for a number of years. They were probably the last club for the membership to fall. Most of the memberships are running right around about 50 to 60 members at this point. Some of them spike for a few years, going up into the hundreds, but then they drop back down to about this. The average club today in Kansas is about 60. I think Perry holds 400 members, but I wouldn't say they're all avid race sailors. A lot of them are just campers. So, far as you've got there, but I would say the average club is running about 60 members. But there was a time though when 60 was just a fleet, not a whole club. So let's just take that for consideration. And one of the ways they SYC Shawnee Yacht Club kept their membership so abreast was what they would do is they would have only I believe 4 races. But the way they would do it is they would run an early race on Sunday, like from 9 to noon. They'd run that 3 hours there. So they'd do the early morning one, and then they would have a break at noon. And then the next race was basically at, I believe, 2:30. And the second race a lot of times was an hour and a half. So they didn't just set a 2-race scene. Sometimes they would set 2 races, but the race committee basically was out there from 9 to about 4. And it was a full day for them, and they switched out race committees too. So that's one of the ways they kept it up there, because what happened is that in between the first race and the second race, they had a lunch. And they would provide a lunch for their members, and that sustained them to their membership finally did fall, and now I think they're down in the 20s, and I hope they can still stay afloat. But and so let's go into, where do we get the members? Well, a lot of them come from the sailing schools. Sailing schools in Kansas City, do we have that many out there? Well, we have a few. We have Shawnee Mission Park, or Johnson County Parks and Rec, provide a sailing school. Lake Jacomo has been trying to provide a club type thing for a number of years now. The rest of them don't really provide sailing schools, versus Perry provides an ASA, or an access to an ASA through Kansas Sailing, but it's not really a club sponsored thing. So really, you only have two schools in this vast area of sailing, which is kind of surprising because it's been a revenue builder. But a lot of times, it's the highest concentrated time. You have to find members and stuff like that. I've always been in favor of saying that we should only have have every sailing school should be free. I think it should be a free service that all clubs provide, and it needs to be a comprehensive type thing. And you start them off at Sunfish, graduate them to 16, and then maybe put them out there on a bigger boat like a Sea Scow or a Catalina 25 or something like that, depending on which way they want to go. So, most of the sailing schools we have here aren't really they're going to go a novice level course. That wouldn't be a Royal Yacht Club Association type level course. It's just pretty much will supply life jacket and vessel and some time and let you see if you can figure it out. So they really don't have a comprehensive course. So at this point in time in the levels that we have, we're really not going to find a way of teaching it to the level that needs to be taught. So that takes a lot of time and energy, and I just don't think we have the volunteers for it here. But out of 7 clubs, you would think that we could come up to one large sailing school that we could drive the traffic from. But nobody has come in here and attempted to produce it. Now, Jacomo's has been doing some stuff that they've been trying to generate a revenue package with it, but I yet to see if it's just going to wear the membership out. I mean, that's the fear I have. If putting too much pressure on the sailing schools is going to sow such a time sponge, you can push your membership away. Your good veteran members can just end up getting burned out so quickly when you do stuff like that. So I really encourage people not to. That's why I say it almost needs to be an off-campus, an off-site type thing. It needs to be one centrally located, and then let the clubs pay a fee to that school. But yet, at this time, they could do their own school, and a lot of them. I don't think Smithville has anything that they've chosen. I don't think Clinton has anything that they've chosen. They just kind of expect you to know how to do it. Now, the whole thing, a lot of people are trying to get away from the racing gig. And as far as the sailing school is concerned, that's one of the things why you see you don't have a good comprehensive course, because racing is a test of the learning. It's not a competition. Most people think sailboat racing is a competition of 2 boats seeing who can be the fastest. No. It's 2 skippers understanding their skill set and seeing what decisions that need to be made for that vessel. So even if I have 2 sunfishes or 2 lasers sitting next to each other and we're going into the windward mark, you're going to have, and you have 2 different skippers, your parent wind and true wind may be almost identical. The crafts may be identical on your one designs, but then you still have decisions you have to be made. Where to sit, where to trim the sail. These are the decisions the skipper has to make. So it's a test of your own knowledge. It's not a competition. Pretty much what it is, it's like playing tennis, but playing it against the wall. You're practicing yourself. You have a measuring stick with your other partner to see what decisions they're making. but that doesn't mean that they're a better decision maker for you. It means that at that point they've made good decisions and the boat may be further ahead. Their vessel may be further down the course than yours, but that doesn't mean that you've made a better decision. And that's why sailboat racing is not a competition, it's a test. And you test yourself over and over and over again. And I feel like that's one of the problems we've had with sailboat racing or with the classes is they don't integrate the racing because that's the comprehensive part of it. So it's one of the things I give food for thought for the sailing clubs out there. I imagine there's many sailors out there just jumping out of their chairs right now going, this is ridiculous. That is so not true. But when you look at it, sailboat racing is not a competition. It's a test of skill. And it's an individual test. And that's a lot of people would probably agree to a certain level of that, but then a lot of people say, no, but they're still in one design. You still have the ability to be able to, nobody's going to win every day. Nobody's going to win every day. It's impossible to win every day. But people can win more consistently than others. And that's why it's not a competition. You cannot dominate. You can obtain dominance, but you cannot dominate because eventually nobody's going to win every day. So let's take a break here. We'll come back at you. The AJ Hall is truly the oldest haunted house in Kansas City. 35 years of freaking you out with Ratman, with a 7-story building under each level of terror. As you wait with anticipation, make sure you get your coupon off the Facebook page. However, it does not matter how cheap you go because you'll never make it out. The snake large enough will just eat you before you get to the front door. This is the darkest haunted house and you will not be able to see in front of your face better than kill you. So get your friends together, get a taxi or Uber to 1300 West 12th Street in Kansas City with certain hours of operation 7:30 to 11:30 p.m. Phone numbers 816-842-4280 because you'll come down in a Ford, but you'll go home in a Cadillac. See you at the edge of hell. All right, here we go, guys. Here we go. We're back from break, and it was a really good break we had. How about those sponsors for us, huh? What do you think? Okay, let's get back into this. And so we were just discussing the level of sailing schools and where they're at here in the Kansas City area. But now let's go on to the race committee in Kansas City. We basically are down to one judge. We've always had one judge. Bernie Cousy had been here for, oh my goodness, it had to be over 40 years of judging and running races for us. And so a love-hate relationship across the community of sailing with him. But I think that's the hard part about being a judge is you got to kind of be what they call a sea lawyer. And, it takes, I think, a special human being to be the right kind of sea lawyer. And a lot of people feel that Bernie's a little over the top. They feel like he has his own personal agenda, and they don't really care for that. But my experience has been with Bernie, and I worked with him a number of years ago when I was going for my PRO. And my experience with Bernie was that he is wanting us to understand that there's more than one form of racing, and you should be able to do everything you can do and understand the rules and know how to handle your boat and your craft in a race under any circumstance. So no matter where you go, you're prepared. So I think he tries to keep well-rounded. Now, a lot of people say that, I'll never forget, we were at Lake Shawnee one year, and we ran we were having a regatta for Lake Shawnee, and we had several, and there was the Sea Scout regatta, and we had several boats up there, and a lot of them were newer boats, actually. They were, I would guess we probably had a regatta of maybe about 25, 30 boats, and probably 12 of them were brand new, and the rest of them were probably a couple years old. So, at that point, a new scow was around $27,000. And so he decides to set up a starboard rounding. And, we always round on port. 99% of the time you're going to be rounding on port when you're in a situation. Now, of course, here's a more interesting thing. He set starboard round instead of port for this one course, and we didn't run. And then the wind kicked up from about 12 knots to about 18. And on a scale, 18 knot wind with puffs up to about 23 was a screaming situation. So it got really interesting really quickly. And after I talked to some of the guys after the race and the regatta and everything and asked them how they felt about it, they were like, it's one thing if you got a $500 boat and you bang it up, but when you got $27,000 invested in a boat, you don't really want to put it at risk like that. And rounding starboard was it's an interesting moment if people are sailing in a close race. You get a group coming in there, it gets really interesting. So, I mean, nobody punched anybody out. I think the guys with the newer boats understood the situation, ran into it with a pretty smooth thing. But, I'll never forget that he was always real keen on stuff like that. And, he'd run all kinds of different type of courses, and he was one of his biggest things I remember him teaching me was movable marks. You got to have movable marks. So if the wind dies, but in Kansas it may die in one place, but it'll move to another. And I remember that because a lot of lakes just have fixed marks. And the day of the fixed mark is kind of gone. And in Kansas, it was probably one of the best things blessings we ever got was when the U.S. sailing rules allowed to be movable marks. It didn't have to have a fixed race. So, back in those days in the early 50s and stuff, when they did that, you would, if there was no wind in around the marks, you were just dead. So this allows an event to go on and on and on. I think that's a real positive thing. So anyway, that's one thing I could say. Our race committee, we're about to lose. Bernie's got to be at least in his late 80s. I know he sold his house in Prairie Village. I think he's living in assisted living at this point. I think he still participates as much as he can. But the days of having a U.S. sailing judge in our city that we can count on and don't have to call in for a national event are about over until somebody else steps up to the plate and wants to go through the whole trial and error of becoming a judge, which requires some traveling, which requires some, a little bit of a time sponge. We're going to have to bring him in, which that's going to cost all the clubs more money. So our race committee situation probably needs to be put up. We need to invest a little bit of money into it. I know, like I said, Bernie has been a love-hate relationship, but I think he did the job that was required, which was he ran the race as a judge, not as a participant. And that means some days you're not going to make everybody happy, and some people may not even like you at the end of the day. Okay, well, let's move on to the next thing here. The people have said, well, is there a lease program here in Kansas City? And Jacomo has a boat sharing program. Jacomo Sailing Club has a boat sharing program. I kind of think that I've talked with John Hayes out there about it, and he's been the brainchild of it and the inspirator of it, and he's got some good people out there hoping it be successful at this point, which I think he's fortunate for that. I'm not sure that boat sharing encourages boat activity. I think it keeps people that are just wanting to go for rides, and I'm not sure that it introduces them any more to sailing than just taking somebody on a crew position. I mean, he's really convinced that this is going to be the resurrecting of the sport here in Kansas City. And I'm like, I just not against it at this point. I'm just waiting to see the whites of the eyes of the success that he has going on. And now let's think about, okay, what's the next step if you got boat sharing? What about boats for sale? Do we have plenty of boats for sale? It's interesting because all the times they set boats for sale up, I've seen them all over the board this summer. Bought a Sunfish for $600 this summer. I've been looking for a Dolphin Senior. Back in the 80s, there were tons of them in people's backyards and in basement, Sunfishes and Snipes and Lightnings, and because the sport had kind of died after the 70s into the 80s. And so people had them, and it wasn't hard to find a good boat for nothing because they just wanted to get them out of the garage so they could put something else there. Now I'm not so sure about that. I've noticed that the 16s are still very proud of their craft. They don't have their molds anymore. The boat's not in production, and the last boat built, I think, sold for $1,500 back in the early 80s. And they're still trying to sell the first 12 boats I saw for sale, and they wanted at least $2,200 for them, $1,800 for them, and I'm like, you guys have kind of bumped your head. So there's some boats that are not even worth a quarter of what they're asking for them, and then there's other boats that are probably worth a lot more, but because people don't want them anymore, they're just giving them away. So Kansas City's got a really, really kind of crazy market. There's no thing like in other markets across the country. You're not going to get too much of this and too much of that. But I've noticed in Kansas City, it's a blessing or a curse. You can either get the most incredible boat for nothing, and then people have no idea what they have, or you can have the worst boat in the world, and they want an arm and a leg for it. It seems so not. It seems so not kosher. I feel like we need to get more of a level of consistency on the pricing of the boats, like a Kelley Blue Book, for the Midwest, and we have a handicap ratings for all the boats when we run PHRF on the races. I think we could probably transgress that into maybe a Kelley Blue Book. So, say take something like a Snark, or you could even, or Force 5. We have ratings for this, so there should be some way of saying how much these boats would be valued. A lot of people say, on the Sweet 16s, the common story I hear all the time is well, it comes with a racing kit. Well, first of all, Sweet 16s were never designed to be raced. You can race them, but they're an angles boat. They're a day sailor angle boat. They're not a performance tactical boat. So having a racing kit on a angles day sailor is kind of like putting, it's like tits on a board. They're just kind of useless. The people that win in that fleet don't win because they have racing gear. They race because they know the angles of the boat and they know the best way to play it. So it's got nothing to do with what rigging you have, or what sail you cut or whatever. It's about just knowing how to sail, and so I always find that super, super interesting. Now let's go into boat building. There is an Olympic sailor here in Kansas City, Scott Griffiths, who's considered he bought the molds out of the dump for the Sweet 16, and he has them at the Missouri Yacht Club, and he's looking for a place to store them. He'd like to have a place to make them, and he's made some interesting designs on it. But I think in the next 5 years he may start trying to build these boats again, and that would be interesting because I think they could, if he could build them for around $7,000, sell them for 14, he'd have something there. And if with some of his designs where you put air tanks in them to make them more floatable, more rideable, I think we could take them. They could be a blue water type boat to where you could put them on the ocean. Right now, you couldn't take a Sweet 16 and take it to St. Petersburg, Florida, or someplace like that. But you put those air tanks in there, and you could take them because they'd be kind of like a fin at that point, and they could be rideable. So you could put them on the ocean, and that would make that boat more marketable. So that's a little food for thought. Things you could try. So this kind of wraps up this first podcast of the Ray's Very Exciting Days of the Sailing Report, and I super appreciate you all listening to me and taking time to put your 2 cents in. You can reach me at, if you want to email me about this, you can reach me at mcscow26@yahoo.com. That stands for MC Scow. It's mcscow26@yahoo.com. Any ideas of topics you'd like us to go ahead and discuss on here, we'd be glad to sit down. We'd love to have some guests as well. So I super appreciate you taking your time, and I hope you have a blessed day. So if you can't be kind to each other. Love your faces. I'm John T, and we are out.